Hello, I'm Graham Fitch and I'm bringing you this video demonstration from Steinway Hall in London for Pianist Magazine, and it's going to be on the wrist. I've got two demonstrations for you. In the first one, I'm going to be talking about a very important movement that we make at the piano, and it's known as the drop roll, sometimes called the drop roll slur. But before we get on to that, let's just look a little bit at positions of the wrist in general, because there's a lot of differences of opinion about the wrist in piano playing, a lot of argument going on about where exactly it should be. The default position will be so that the wrist is level with the rest of the arm, so that there's an unbroken line between the back of the hand and the arm, and my arm is more or less parallel with the ground. Now, there is a little bit of leeway here. We're not always going to be in that fixed position. We can raise the wrist higher and we can go down lower, but normally we want to avoid dropping the wrist and playing with fixed fingers like this, what I call piston fingers. This is really bad for piano technique in general because I'm pulling here. If I play like this, I'm pulling on the tendons that go from here up to my arm, and that's going to cause me injury. It's seriously not a good idea. So, general playing position, level. When we do drop down, and I'm going to show you this in the drop roll, it's normally a part of a continuous movement that will come back up again. So I'm talking about avoiding a fixed position with a low wrist. There are some occasions, and the rotary trill, if I show you a rotary trill between 1 and 3, do you notice there my wrist is quite low? But I could go on all day doing that without any tension because it's not actually pulling on anything. I'm using a rotary movement of my forearm. There are occasions when we do want to have a high wrist. I'm going to show you the last movement of or a little bit of the last movement of Schumann's Papillon, where I will want my wrists quite high to make a kind of brassy sound. Straight fingers, high wrist, and certainly no give in the wrist. I don't want any springiness in my wrist here. So tonally speaking, what that does, it gives me a bright edge to my sound. Let's look a little bit at how the wrist moves. There are two ways the wrist moves. One is up and down like this, like a hinge, and the other is side to side laterally. We're going to look at this in a little bit of detail now, but let me just clear up one misunderstanding about the wrist. I've heard it said wrist rotation, as though the wrist itself rotates. It may look like my wrist is rotating when I do this, but the rotation actually comes from the forearm here. So some people call it wrist rotation, just in case you're wondering why, because it actually looks like the wrist is working, but it's coming from further back. Now, the lateral movement is really important for lining up the fingers in 5-finger positions. So if I take just a regular 5-finger position, I think you'll be able to see my right hand very clearly here. This is how we want to do it. Did you notice there what I'm doing? I'm not isolating my fingers from my hand. Let me do it wrong, just to show you. Again, piston fingers, fixed wrist, fixed arm, really not a good idea. What I do is I line up my arm behind each finger that plays, using the lateral movement of the wrist. Let me show you that in a piece. This is the Bach Musette from the Anna Magdalena. Do you see what's happening there? So even though I'm using my fingers quite actively because I want that bright, brilliant sound, I'm finding that what I need to do is to be free with that lateral movement, to enable that lateral movement. And my wrist is really loose here, really loose when I do that. Let me just give you an example from the middle section of the Grieg Nocturne, where you will see I have to use this lateral movement of my wrist, or else I simply wouldn't be able to manage it. Let me just play you a little bit of it first. Let me just go through that a little bit slower so that you can see what I'm doing. What I'm doing here is finding a position where, when I drop on 5 and 3, my wrist and my arm are in one line. If I were to do that with the next pair of notes, there would be a different alignment. There would be a different alignment between 1 and 3. So my job, my wrist's job, is to move between those 3 positions. And you may say, well, that's all very well, but I can see your arm moving as well. Yes, because this is all one unit. And what we want to do in advanced piano playing, even not advanced piano playing, basic piano playing as well, is to make sure that we're not switching off our arm and using our fingers in this way. So I'm moving through my arm, through my wrist, and there's a smaller movement going on up here, bigger movements happening down there. So that's the Grieg Nocturne. I'm going to show you an example of a piece of music. It happens to be by Ibert, Jacques Ibert, and it's called The Little White Donkey. And the left hand here looks like a really good example of wrist staccato. Let me show you a little bit of the left hand. Do you see what's going on in my left hand there? Wrist, what looks like wrist staccato. It is wrist staccato, but like in so much of piano playing, it's a blend of the fingertip with the wrist. And notice again, I'm using my lateral adjustments. If I were to fix my hand in one place and just use my wrist, I'm feeling tension. Tension we don't need. So in order for me not to be tense, I'm noticing, I'm sensing, I've got one position here, slightly different alignment, and a different alignment here. So rather like my Grieg 3 positions, I've got 3 positions here. And as I bounce my wrist with a firm finger, I move through those 3 positions, and that keeps me free, focused, loose. Let me leave that one and just talk a little bit about, well, I actually have talked about the causes of RSI, or repetitive strain, which is the low wrist. So just to remind you again, don't play with a low wrist, with a dropped wrist. There are a couple of examples that I can give you of the fixed wrist, but I think what I'll do is I'll leave that, just tell you that there are occasions in piano playing where we do want to have the wrist firm. What I've got there is a solid wrist, not stiff, not tight, but firm, as you might call it, braced. Let's get to the whole arm roll, and then I will get to the drop roll. The whole arm roll, just take any chord you like. I'm going to take a diminished 7th chord. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it with my hand and move the upper arm forwards and backwards. And what you'll see is the wrist rising and falling. And you'll also sense that there's a, if I exaggerate it, there's a sliding movement in and out. That is the whole arm roll, where the arm, wrist and hand act as one unit. Now let me move now to the drop roll, which is where, again, we use the whole arm roll to grip a key. Let me just go down into a key, grip with a finger, and I'm going to come up with my upper arm and move forwards and backwards. Do you see the movement there? Down and then up, but it's not just up, it's up and back. And that we can, if we do that with a float up, I get a very soft ending. So strong, weak, perfect for appoggiaturas. If I do it with a kick off or a spring off, I'm going to get an accent on the last note. It could be 2 or 3 notes. There's a drop roll between 3 notes with a float off. there's the kick-off, which of course gives you an accent. Now, we can use the drop roll when we're teaching beginners to play legato. The very first thing we're going to do is to drop roll between 2 and 3 for legato. And again, you notice I'm going down and then coming back up again. One continuous movement. And for beginners, between 2 and 3, then between 3 and 4, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, and then we can start using 3 notes and then 4 notes. So that's the drop roll for beginners. Let's look at how we might use the example of Mozart. This is the Fantasia in D minor. Here it comes. I'm making a bit of a meal of it, but what I'm doing is drop, roll, and releasing upwards out of the second note of my slur, which gives me a soft, faded, tapered ending. Let's look at an example of the drop roll now where we don't actually release the keyboard, but I release here in my wrist. I'm actually not going to use that example. I've got a better one that's just occurred to me, and that is the G-flat impromptu of Schubert. Let me just show you now what I'm going to do in slow motion. I'm dropping into the first note. Let's just dissect that a little bit. Drop here, come up here, very slowly. Do you notice the flexibility in my wrist there? Add weight, remove weight. And that gives me control over sound. It keeps me loose, it keeps me free, it keeps me mobile. Let me move to the C minor prelude of Chopin. And I'm going to show you how, just in conclusion, I'm going to show you how you can use the drop roll in big, sonorous, fortissimo writing chords when you want to minimize the percussive attack. So let me just show you how I'm going to do that. From the key surface, I drop down, I come back up, drop down. I'm getting a big sound, but I'm achieving length rather than attack. So that's the drop roll in its variety of different uses, and I hope you enjoy exploring it.